In the winter of 1943, the Tehran Conference forged a fragile alliance, demanding a synchronization of military might previously thought impossible. The leaders of Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union agreed to squeeze the German war machine from all sides. By the summer of 1944, the 15th Air Force enacted a daring operational leap. Long-range P-51 Mustangs and B-17 flying fortresses departed Italian airfields on a shuttle mission designed to permanently link the Western and Eastern fronts. A historic rendezvous was set into motion, executing a shuttle mission that ended on the newly established airstrips of Ukraine. American airmen arrived at a remarkable cultural exchange, greeted by Soviet commanders, U.S. Ambassador Harriman, and the undeniable reality of a fractured world uniting against a common enemy. American and Soviet forces operated side by side, preparing fortresses for the next strike on the Reich. Decades later, the veil surrounding Soviet aviation lifts, revealing a paradox of crude instrumentation and rugged survival.
They were woefully crude in their instrumentation. They had no such thing as the standard instrument panel with an artificial horizon. They flew on basic instruments, which I find quite extraordinary when you consider the weather in Russia, particularly in the winter. I wouldn't have thought was of the best. I would have thought they needed to do a lot of instrument flying.
British exchange pilots discovered aircraft structures where every rivet could be felt, and engines engineered with a brutal 100-hour lifespan. Yet, from these raw materials emerged legendary machines like the PE-2 and the Lavochkin 7, flown by brave men and women who faced the Luftwaffe in the largest air battles in human history.
At Tehran last December, the leaders of England and America and Russia got together for the first time. And in June, the long-range Mustangs and flying fortresses of the 15th Air Force prepared for a mission that would actually link the Allied and Russian fronts. Gunners were carefully brushed up on recognition, and then the bombardiers and navigators were briefed for a shuttle mission to Russia.
On many occasions, positive recognition of that fighter will save lives. I'm going to contrast for you two planes, the Messerschmitt 109 and our own P-51. Here they are. In plan view, you can see that the P-51 is the larger plane. Profile view, another clear contrast is the high, square-cut appearance of the 51's fin and rudder.
Our axis of attack is 5 degrees magnetic. Target time will be 1300, and we will bomb from flight level pressure altitude of 22,000 feet. The size of the target is 800 feet by 200 feet. Now, gentlemen, if we refer to the opposite side of the target charts, I'll give you the brief aiming points. It is expected that you'll do pilotage all the way to the target, because it will be difficult to find, and we must get it the first time. Make any observations that you can find that will help our intelligence section. Now, I want you to make that turn at the RP. I want you to make it good. Chill your drift and your rate on somebody directly beneath you. Then, roll your telescope back out and begin to sight. And Navigators, let's see what we have today. Remember that all plans are important, as this is a coordinated attack.
General Twining said goodbye to his task force commander and then took off in his own B-26 to watch his fortresses form up over Italy and head east toward Russia. Mr. Harriman, the U.S. ambassador to Russia, and his daughter came down from Moscow to the new Ukraine bases to welcome the American airmen. General Eaker, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Allied Air Forces, flew with the fortresses. General Eaker and General Permanov, Russian commander of the bases, leave to inspect the other fields. In the name of President Roosevelt, General Eaker pins the Legion of Merit on General Permanov. some of the Yanks went into town to look at the ruins of what was once a great city before the Germans came and were chased out. In the evenings, the Russians, based at the air bases that our men used, put on shows for the Yanks.
И пой на сон любимый, гордись своим простором золотым. Твои клубы, как рай родимый, мы никогда не отдадим. Наши здесь идет Сталин, от нищеты, горя и оков, и первый раз твой фокус. А вот хлеба полные амбары, прибыль открыть. И не надо, ты твоя, а ты и снова шаг, и снова вернем. Едино твой товарищ.
Pretty good. Tastes just like milk from Missouri or Texas.
Родимая сторона, приди от нас, гонит покой. Ай, пой на сон любимый, гордись своим простором золотым. Твои глубокий наш край родимый, мы никогда врагам не отдадим. Наши степи, идет товарищ Сталин, огни щиты и горе и опор.
Russian fighter planes protected the American bases.
А полка хлеба, полные амбары, прибыль ложится, стала на дону. Это его не кроткою не даром, вида поля, за твою войну. А эти нагрянет новой силой, и умножил шашки снова вырвем бой.
And Russian anti-aircraft kept the Luftwaffe out of the skies.
Они все ушных лафетов, и только пик поднимется в краю. А мирный труд на вольный край совета, за молодую родину свою. А по степи опять со славой громкой пойдут полки со слона и на слон.
He got that medal at Stalingrad. American nurses were at all our bases in Russia. This is headquarters of the main base. Yanks and Russians work side by side to get the fortresses ready for the next mission for Moscow. And at the fighter bases, the Mustangs got ready to escort the fortresses. Target number 2 plastered for Moscow.
простором золотым, твоих любовников, крайне вы никогда, как я таких. Наших дней идет прорицание, от нищеты, горя и работ, и наверняка большое полдыха, надо молодой, вот хлеба полные амбары, прибыла ты, стала на дону, это неволе, крупною не надо, ты твоя. Нагрянет голый силы, и снова Берлин-Бон, иди на бой, товарищ Барбаросса, станет теперь боевой станет теперь мускулами квартета, и сколько пик погинет под краю. А не лицо, довольный край поэта, да молодой, свою свою. Подсети опять со славой громкой, пойдут полки со славой. Любимый, гордись своим простором золотым, своих лугов и сажен край родимый, вы никогда, как я один. Защити.
Target number 3 plastered for Moscow. in case the outfits that didn't go to Russia might be a little jealous, they can say to those that did, okay, you guys did make history. But while you were gone, we got some new airfields that used to belong to Jerry, and incidentally, we helped take Rome.
For a while, immediately after World War II, we had a period of about 2 months where the Russians were very amenable to letting me into their occupation zone. And at first, for the first month, they would gladly give me aircraft to fly because their attitude was, you were the only nation that helped us when we were in real trouble at the beginning of the war. And they weren't going to, although you see pictures of handshaking with Americans and French. They weren't really going to have anything to do with them as regards exchange of flying. And so for a month I had a good run like that, and then for the second month it tightened up a little. They wouldn't let me fly unless I brought a British aircraft and let them fly it. So I took a Firefly around with me and we got a few hops that way. Oh, I flew about 12 to 15 different aircraft. But my general impression, well, they were woefully crude in their instrumentation. They had no such thing as the standard instrument panel with an artificial horizon. They flew on basic instruments, which I find quite extraordinary when you consider the weather in Russia, particularly in the winter. I wouldn't have thought was of the best. I would have thought they needed to do a lot of instrument flying, but all this being done on basic instruments. And so from that point of view, they were a little behind. Not a little, a long way behind. But the very last one I flew, they were suddenly getting the word, and things were getting better. The other thing I thought about it, the structure of the aircraft. If you run your hand along the fuselage of a Spitfire, it's pretty smooth. In spite of all the riveting there, it's pretty smooth. If you ran it along the fuselage of a Russian aircraft, you could almost feel every rivet. And that must have added to drag, of course. But it looked a little basic in that sense. And finally, their engines. They had a philosophy that military engines shouldn't be built to last any more than 100 hours. Not an unreasonable attitude, because after all, that's probably the truth, that if you're really in a combat aircraft, the engine will be lucky to last 100 hours. But they sounded like as if they were made that way. Whereas you get the lovely purr of the Merlin and the sort of throaty growl of the Griffin. With the Russian engines, it was a clanking noise. And I always thought, my God, they're building them for 100 hours. This one sounds as if it's in its 90s. And they were a bit that way. So there were certain things that didn't leave you with great peace of mind about them. But and on the other hand, was interesting to fly to see how they compared. I think the two best ones I flew were, they had an aircraft called the PE-2, which was a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft, which was very nice aircraft to fly, and apart from the instrumentation we mentioned, really up to anything of that era, and we're talking about the early 1940s. Then at the end of the war, I flew a fighter called the Lavochkin 7, and that was, again, even in the instrumentation, had now come up to pretty well to Allied standards. But it had been a long process. Their pilots, generally speaking, from everything I've learned about them, were very, very good, but tactically naive. They believed, for example, in flying formations of the Il-2, which was the Sturmovik, and only had one gun at the back, which in effect was a pea shooter, and they sat together in large gaggles and thought that they could defend themselves with all these pea shooters firing at you, and many of these, incidentally, being flown by women pilots. And to quote Bobby Hartman, who was the top scorer in World War II, he said it was a turkey shoot. You just, he said, I never fired until the aircraft filled my windscreen. And he said because their firepower was negligible coming back at you. And you begin to realize how the Germans began to put up scores. Like Harriman, I think, had 352. And in the Battle of Kursk, where this was the biggest air battle of all time over in Russia, the Soviets lost over 400 aircraft, and the Germans, who were using 109s and 190s, lost 27.
But interestingly, on the ground, I guess the Soviet tanks succeeded over the German.
Quantity, to a large degree, yes. And, of course, they were built to operate in snow. One has to admit, if you are going to take on a country like Russia, you better know what it's like to deal with the winter conditions. When you look back on it, I think if the German Operation Barbarossa had started a month and a half earlier than it did, and it was scheduled to start, but because of logistic problems, it didn't. One has to remember the Germans had actually reached Moscow. And the problem was, when they were there, unfortunately, the forward troops were there, but the logistic backup hadn't arrived. And it was bogged down in the snow. If that all had happened a month and a half earlier, they would probably have had the logistics in Moscow, and that could have been a very different state of affairs. The strange thing about Russian aviation is they had some brilliant designers, but Stalin had a peculiar attitude towards them. He was afraid that they might not concentrate their minds enough if they lived an ordinary life. So he arrested the lot. All their jet designers, their high-speed flight designers, their rocket designers, and put them in a gulag. But a 4-star gulag. Kept them in reasonable comfort, but they were imprisoned for 20 years. And he wanted them to all intermingle, learn a lot from each other, and maybe produce some wonderful ideas. Well, they certainly did. There was some wonderful research aircraft produced. But he wouldn't let them out, getting down to what he called production aircraft. He let the lower level produce many of these. And The reason for his attitude was he himself was scared stiff of flying. In his entire career as dictator, we only know of him flying once, and that was to the Yalta Conference with Churchill and Roosevelt. And the story is that on the return journey to Moscow, they ran into some bad weather, and the aircraft had a sudden drop when it got into a pocket of air, and this so scared the wits out of him that he vowed never to fly again, and he never did. And it's astonishing when you think of the huge distances involved in Russia, and here was the man holding the reins, and you'd think he wanted to go to every part of Russia and learn all about it, and he wouldn't fly.